I think we're live. I don't quite see. I think we're live, so I'm gonna go with that. Welcome and good evening to our Fearless Flight weekly live show, and this is the crew edition. And on crew tonight, flight attendant Diane. Hello, Diane.
Hello, everybody.
And Captain Eric Larson, who tried to pull a fast one on us. But we did reel him in, and he is ready to go. Eric, how are you doing?
Good. Finally, I have computer issues and nothing was connecting, and so I'm talking to you over my phone with a cellular network. And if I go bailing out of here, you guys, I got to go downstairs and get charging equipment because I didn't anticipate doing the whole video show on the phone, but I got plenty of juice for right now anyway.
Well, we appreciate the effort. I want to just start out by saying, if you are not a member of our Facebook group, Birds of a Feather, then you are definitely missing out. We had one of our good friends here at Fearless Flight, Don Calvert, is it was the Dominican, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Dominican.
Yeah.
He just recently flew, and actually, Captain Eric, you were chatting with him just before the flight, right?
This morning, and he was a little ramped up like he usually is, and he said he had not been being good and checking in as much and doing his exercises in advance, his mental gymnastics. But I looked at the radar picture for him, and it looked good. And then I pulled the winds of law forecast for offshore, and by some miracle, what I told him matched what the pilots told him, and it turned out to be a really good ride for him down there. So he was relieved, and now he's starting the fun part of his vacation.
Well, the picture is really, really cool. It's one of those, I think it's one of those 3D images, which is super cool.
Yeah.
So again, if you're not a member of Birds of a Feather yet, it's free to join. And the other success story, I want a big shout out to Sharon. She landed safely in Vegas a few days ago, and what I love this, and there was turbulence, and it didn't bother me. So very, very cool. She also posted some pictures as well, and and she said, "I'm excited to continue to travel the world. Baby steps, and each destination will be further than the last." And that is definitely one thing that we do recommend. And I'm gonna say, Southwest Airlines makes it fairly easy with their fare sales, where you can go on a short little hop somewhere for $50-$60 one way, and there's really no reason not to take advantage of that, in conjunction with everything that you're learning here, everything that we have to offer. And speaking of learning, and speaking of flying, we have our last monthly live group coaching call this Thursday. So in just 2 days, Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. And this time we'll be talking about flying over water and longer flights in general, because just like Sharon, a lot of you, you whatever the belief, whatever the story inside says, well, a short flight, I'm okay, but the longer it goes, the more I'm playing with my luck, the more I'm playing the odds. And while that is not necessarily true, it is certainly something that's real for a lot of you.
Yeah.
And so in this upcoming webinar, Captain Ron, Captain Eric will be talking about flying over water and those longer flights, how to break up your flight into segments, and also especially if you're going to Hawaii or places like that. What are the nuts and bolts if anything happens? So we got you covered there. And Captain Eric, I think you have prepared something about Boeing, right?
Yes, I wanted to address a question that came up from one of our viewers. It was actually quite introspective, or not introspective. It was quite thoughtful, and so I wanted to address it and not bore you guys, but it's off a subject we don't normally get on. There have been some news coverage lately about the latest version of the 737 MAX, and this was a -7 version, the shortest version of the airplanes, and it's just finishing certification process, and they're actually hoping to finish it by the end of the year. And there is a problem with the engine anti-icing system. However, it's not new and unique. It is the same thing that all the other variants of the MAX have dealt with and had to make an adjustment. And it isn't so much the problem per se as I wanted to address the process. Once airplane production starts, oftentimes there are improvements in engineering or systems that didn't work as well as the company had hoped, and then changes are made in the with the agreement of the FAA to the certification process of how a system's going to work, how they're going to roll the airplane out, and what's going to happen. And the specific problem is with the engine anti-icing system on the MAX series. And I'll try and show you what we're talking about. I have a visual aid, but on my little phone, it's really hard to line up. Can you guys see my, this happens to be an Airbus, but can you see my Airbus model?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so we're talking about the cowl portion of the engine. The shiny metal part on the front of the engine is de-iced to prevent, to knock ice off and to prevent ice formation. And the MAX has a problem where under certain remote combinations of temperature and pressure, that can be overheated, doing damage to the airplane and what we call the annealing on that surface. So normally, if the pilots were brain dead and just left that on all the time, it would not harm it. But this, because of these certain sets of circumstances, could possibly overheat the engine cowl lip. So what the company has done in conjunction with the FAA is to issue what's called an AD, an advisory directive. And the AD merely states only to operate that anti-icing system in visible moisture when icing conditions are known or anticipated. And that is now a operational procedure included in the flight manuals of those airplanes. And the pilots that train on that and are qualified on that are aware of that, just the same as the pilots are aware of the gear handle should be put down before landing. They know that when this engine anti-icing system is operated, it should only be done so in icing conditions. However, Boeing does not want to leave that restriction for that advisory directive into perpetuity, and they've asked for an exemption through 2026 to modify the system for all of the airplanes. And in fact, what my understanding is they have completed the work. And so what will happen will be that the airplanes will be pulled off the line as they rotate through maintenance one at a time. That system will be fixed so that the operation of it lines up with other aircraft, other 737s, and the restriction will be removed once the repair is made. But they have asked the FAA for this temporary exemption and have them issue the AD or the advisory directive I just described. So the FAA will highly likely approve that for this newest variant of the airplane because they approved it for the other ones. Mm-hmm. So someone asked, gee, how often does that occur? Well, actually, things of that nature occur all the time in production because the airplane development isn't static. The company doesn't roll out the airplane and go, there, we're done, which would happen in a perfect world. But systems are improved, or there's a problem, or they're swapped out, or they're modified all the time. So these exemptions, ADs, that sort of thing are put on and then removed during an airplane's life. And it also happens at the start of the airplane's life as it rolls off the assembly line from the factory. So it's just a normal kind of development process with the aircraft as it comes into production and starts its flying life. But it was a very good question. I don't know who asked that.
I think that the concern and you addressed that really well. And Tracy, I think, I see you said got it, because Tracy was asking what's the long-term solution. I think what a little bit the background of the question was just simply not understanding that it's that this is not a static thing. Like the airplane gets delivered and then everything is perfect until it gets retired 30 years later. So this is a fluid process, and it's not nefarious in any sort of way to try and ask for an exemption, because I think that was kind of like maybe a little bit the fear. How often do the companies ask for that, and whether or not that makes the aircraft less safe? So that
terminology of exemption has a tendency to trigger another fear in the mind of some other people, saying exemption. Wait a minute, that doesn't sound good to begin with. But as Eric explained it all, it's not nefarious or malignant at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You hope the new baby is perfect, but it doesn't always turn out that way. Just like with airplanes on the line, we have a minimum equipment list so that we can operate for certain periods of time with certain systems inoperative, provided they get repaired at the next station or whatever the interval is prescribed. And this is just sort of an extension of that kind of process. And the good news is that Boeing has already developed the fix for this. And these airplanes will start being yanked offline, having that modification done, and then the restriction will disappear for these airplanes as the system modification is done, and they come out like the newborn baby, like they were supposed to.
And you know, that you mentioned something that is really important. Planes can fly, aircraft can fly with things not working, but they aren't critical to not work. I mean, my airplane, for example, the coffee pot might not work. I couldn't make coffee. I mean, so everything gets written up. You know, this isn't working, and so there are some things that can cause a plane not to fly. We get mechanics on and things are delayed, we change planes, whatever. But then there are things that if it's not working, it's okay until we get to the next station or the next cycle or anything else. And so sometimes I've gotten on a plane and they have a tendency, the mechanics have a tendency to put like the coffee pot is inop, things are inoperable, and they'll put it on a little yellow sticky tab, you know, those little Post-it notes, and they'll put it around the forward flight attendants little area where our phones are, and we have switches and all kinds of stuff, and the magic button we hit to open and close the door, you know, to get in and out of the plane. And sometimes I get on and there may be one sticky that says this seat 18A is broken, and so we can't put anybody in there, obviously. And then sometimes I've gotten on a plane and there's like yellow sticky notes everywhere, and but none of those things is critical. It just may mean if the seat doesn't work or the seatbelt doesn't work, we have one less passenger on the plane. So,
well, that's actually what Jim just mentioned in the chat, that Jim, by the way, is on a cruise ship,
I know he's on a cruise again.
which is awesome.
This
Good for you,
good
Jim.
guy.
But he said that his seat did not recline. Yes. And
Yeah.
so I have no idea about the odds of things, and but I remember flying just a couple of months ago, and also my seat wouldn't recline, wouldn't work. And in that particular case, though, it was deemed also a safety for some reason, because I guess it wouldn't stay locked.
It won't stay locked. Yeah.
Yeah, and so then they just gave me another seat, and
Yeah.
so that
Yeah.
does happen.
Yeah.
Diane can probably address that. If it's locked upright, that's okay from the maintenance standpoint. But if it will not remain locked upright, then it can be an impediment to evacuation, and the airline is not allowed to dispatch with a seat like that if it will not remain locked upright.
And one thing that's interesting, if you're in my aircraft, if the aft flight of a flight attendant, one of the many things we have to do for a pre-flight is we have to check if we have our lifelines in the right place. But I have to go literally like this to all the seats that are the extra row seats in the row in front of them, to make sure, just as Eric said, that they don't wiggle and wobble. I mean, there's a certain amount of leeway that they're allowed, but if they won't stay secured, then that is a definite problem. But for example, some of the seats, the rows in front, any row in front of an exit row never reclines anyway. They're not allowed to. So
I love it. Tracy said, I sit up straight, so straight on my flights, I wouldn't know if my seat.
You would know.
You know what?
Funny.
I'm gonna say, the person behind you always would love to fly wherever you're flying.
They would buy Tracy a ticket to sit in front of them.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll always.
Yeah, without a doubt.
That's pretty great. Oh my God.
And Jim said that JetBlue offered him a new seat or a $300 voucher. Wow. That seems.
Wow.
That's a lot.
I guess that's a Christmas thing. It's like the season of
It
giving.
could be. Who knows?
Well, it's one thing. I mean, Jim's making these real long-legged trips. And if you're flying from LA to Vegas, that's one thing. But if you're taking off over water and you're going to sit upright like a 4-year-old kid in church on Christmas Eve for 6 or 7 or 10 hours, then that's a whole other ball of wax. So he may have had a longer trip going on, and the airline felt that a bribe for his patience and understanding would be appropriate and in order.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know what? It's one of those things where you may not expect it, but it does happen, and it can happen. And by and large, some of us that fly a lot more get a little cynical sometimes, and yet these things happen, and generosity is still around. So, and Jim flew from LA to Miami, so
oh yeah, that's a long flight.
And I do want to say, and Jim pointed that out, that he actually posted the video in the Birds of a Feather, and I always love watching Jim's takeoff and landings. They're just really well done, number one. But it really, it's one of those things you can, if you haven't flown in a while, there's a lot of these videos in the group, and they can definitely help you getting back into the mindset of takeoff and landing, and that already can help a lot, exposing yourself to those videos.
And the sound, all the different sounds that happen, the engine spooling up. I mean, those really do. You're right, Dieter. Those make a difference.
Yeah, especially if you're not used to those. Derek, do we have something else going on, or is that our aviation news for the evening?
I was afraid that I would get too deep into that, and it went actually much more smoothly than I thought. And I didn't have another sort of sermon prepared, and I haven't seen anything this week that was real striking or jumped out at me. And so if our peeps want to save us or have any burning questions, as always, we're happy to answer those and happy to be derailed.
That there's a question in the actually that somebody asked on YouTube. And I'm not even sure if that's just a straight meteorology question, but what makes the question is, what makes thunderstorms happen in winter? And is there any difference in navigating those kinds of thunderstorms in the winter time versus regular ones, I guess, in the summer? Or
well, it's that's a good question, and answer to answer the second part, the answer to that is no. There's no difference circumnavigating them, and if there is are warm weather days or a warm front, a cold front coming from behind pushing up the warm air, that sort of thing. And by cold and warm, I mean two different air masses of different temperatures. Not warm like, oh, today this is shirt sleeves and tomorrow it's a parka. Anytime there's a big difference in the temperature of the air masses and the air isn't so cold that it can hold water, thunderstorms can be produced. But I got to remember, I'm just recalling one of my favorite captains from 1,000 years ago. We were flying buzzing along one time, and it was night, and there was a big flash of lightning way out in front of the airplane. And after several curse words, he goes, "What month is this anyway? This is outrageous and egregious." And he was sorely offended that we were in fact seeing a wintertime nocturnal thunderstorm, which is pretty strange. Now, if you're down in the southern belt states or tropics or going to the Gulf of Mexico or something, sure, that can happen. But if you're flying along up north over Montana and the Midwest, or you're on your way to East Overshoe, my favorite fictional airport, that's kind of an odd deal. But they can happen if there are air masses of these differing temperatures, and the air of the warm air mass is warm enough to hold liquid moisture. It can happen.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is you deal with them exactly the same way as you deal with any other thunderstorm.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
And I do wanna also make a quick shout out, Marsha. I saw Marsha was watching earlier. Maybe you're still on, and then also Tom and Sue Hopkins as well. So just want to make sure that I acknowledge to you guys. And the other question that came up is, what about flight delays due to, and that we may not be the best ones to answer that, but flight delays due to de-icing and of that nature? Are there any rules around that? And I can answer that. I'm sure there are rules around it. The question is, Eric and Diane, are we aware of some of the rules in terms of, because I know in Toronto it's a thing where sometimes you would de-ice and then we're standing in queue. That was 2 years ago, and then we got the PA, the captain came on and said, "Oh, we gotta head back because we were waiting too long, and so we gotta do it one more time."
We talked about that a few weeks ago, and that's exactly what can happen, which is really, well, Eric can tell you way more annoying than I can, but yeah, that I mean, you're in a line. It's like waiting at the post office, for your turn to go mail a package or something. And you get there, and just as you get there, the guy goes, or the gal goes on break, and it's like, wait a minute, I've just been in, and it's like starting all over again. So Eric, you take that, and when you're done, I've got my own small winter sermon to give too. So
the answer to that question is the airlines will make. I think it was a kind of a question about scheduling and how do the crews deal with it. The scheduling answer is during winter season, in and out of airports like where Dieter lives in Toronto, where there are many months of darkness and snow, the airlines know that the airplanes are not going to go in and out of there as fast as they do in June. And they bump out the time that they allow for the anticipating the taxi is going to be slow. There may be de-icing, so that everything doesn't always show up late to everywhere. But they only have to, they just take a guess at that. And what's working against them is that they bump out that schedule and that time everywhere, that scheduled time. The pilots and the flight attendants get paid on the greater of whatever length of time they flew the trip or whatever the schedule is. So if they anticipate this weather delay stuff all the time, and the airplane and the crews aren't absorbing some of that, then they have labor money going out the door. And the other aspect of the question is what Dieter was talking about. We had to go back. It's one thing to strip the ice off the airplane. It's a second can of worms entirely to put, as we call type 4 de-icing fluid on it, which is an absorbent. And the absorbent has very specific time limits for rates and types of precipitation that it can absorb and still take off safely. And the pilots observe that strictly and know what that is. And if you get in too long a line and you've exceeded what we refer to in the de-icing world as the holdover time, if you've exceeded the holdover time, the airplane has to go back to the de-icing area and start with type 1. They have to have it all stripped off and then go with the type 4 and recode it. And it's a very lengthy and expensive process. So if the timing is not right between the de-icing gantries and the runway, that can happen. And the airports are good at minimizing that, lining people up in the de-icing queue so that they get hit, short taxi the runway, bang, they can go, so that they aren't in general blocking of it. You don't have people with a later departure in front of people with an earlier departure, and they make sure the queue can flow through and go. But once in a while it happens. And if the precipitation is heavy enough and nasty enough and you exceed that holdover time, you got to go back to go and start over.
Yeah. And as Eric said, depending, they determine departure and arrival times. It's a historic average. And so they'll take a certain route, Phoenix to Albuquerque, and they will take the times from pushback to arrival, and they'll do it for dozens or hundreds. I don't know what the specific number is, but they'll take the average of all of those flights and say, this is what we anticipate for the length of the flight. This is not wheels up to wheels down, but this is pushback to arrival. And that takes into consideration the time of year, the taxi, all those kinds of things. So they're not pulling these numbers out of their head. There's a lot of math in creating and constructing these schedules. But as Eric said, when there's a bad storm, I just pulled up one of my little my winter sermon. Last Christmas, I had a 4-day trip, and I was scheduled to work in 4 days. I was scheduled to work 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 legs. I was going to deadhead in one, but 7. That was the Christmas last year that unfortunately Southwest had a technical system-wide meltdown. They had to cancel zillions of flights, it seemed, but the weather was terrible. The weather was just abominable all across the country, and flights got canceled, and it was just a mess. And out of 4 days, when I was supposed to work 7 flights, I worked 1. I mean, I worked one leg out of 4 days of flying. And I spent all of Christmas Day, almost all of Christmas Day, sitting at a gate area in Dallas. This is how really glamorous this job is. I was sitting there crocheting all afternoon. And so because the planes weren't going, it was the perfect storm. And then everything got delayed and delayed and delayed. And so just this Sunday, I was flying from Florida through Houston to come back to Phoenix. The aircraft that we were supposed to pick up in Florida was coming from Atlanta. There were tremendous storms, all that part of the country. And so that meant that domino that we have talked about in the past, about that this flight's late and that makes that flight late, which makes that flight late. And so one of the unfortunate consequences is there was a number of people in the Florida that were going to they were going to Houston, but they needed to get to Omaha, and they weren't going to be able to make their connection. And so, of course, naturally, being the flight attendant, I'm pulling up my phone to see exactly what the schedule was, what their hoped for layover time was going to be in Houston, and it wasn't long enough. So as I've always said, please pack your patience. Be a patient passenger if you can. But back in the old days when travel agents used to make schedules, they always had there were a lot of different circumstances that were different. But nowadays people are making their own reservations. And their assumption is if the airline says I can book a ticket from here to here and then a second leg from here to here, if I can book that, then I should be able to make it. No, that doesn't. No. We're all shaking our heads.
No, don't. resist your baser urges.
Right.
Don't book that stuff while you're drinking, and don't assume that you can go through a super airport that's the size of Iowa and get across it in 26 minutes, because your odds of making that are slim to none.
Yeah.
So the thing is, when people look, they go, oh my gosh, I don't want to have to sit in Houston or to fill in the blank, LA, whatever airport it is. I don't want to have to sit there for 2 hours. That's 2 hours. For me, depending on the time of year and what time I leave in the morning, all those things, I would rather not. Would I rather sit there for 2 hours as opposed to 47 minutes? I am never going to make a connection. I'm never going to book one intentionally for that short a time, because I know all of us here, we all know too much. That's not going to work. And so particularly during holiday season, it's just everything that can go wrong seems to go wronger, and I know, and I'm the grammar queen. That's terrible. But do resist that connection, or the inclination, as Eric said, to book that ticket. Give yourself more time. Bring books. Bring whatever it is, because the consequence of not making your flight at all. Those poor people probably. I'm hoping they finally got back to Omaha. I don't know, but it's easier to wait longer in the airport and get on a flight than it is to wind up saying, oh my gosh, my flight's late an hour leaving, and it's gonna.
And if anxiety is already part of your journey, that's one way how you can reduce it for sure.
Right.
Jim says, a friend recently asked me if 40 minutes was enough time in Phoenix. I said not to take the chance. And I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing that the airline would even let you do a 40-minute.
They don't.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just so. But yeah, 40 minutes. I've flown out there enough that, geez, you can get a few miles in there before you get from one plane to the next.
It's true. I mean, it could happen. You could make the flight. I'm not going to say it's never going to work, but the odds are against you. The odds are you're making it, as Eric said, and in Sky Harbor, you may land at a high A at A29, and your next flight is at B27. That's a long way to get from the farthest gate at the farthest concourse all the way to the farthest gate at the other end at the farthest concourse. So, and God forbid, in some airports, you have to get on a shuttle bus to go to a satellite terminal. And, you'll never get there. So do your research.
absolutely. That's definitely a good one.
Resist the temptation. It's the same thing as you would say, why go to a doctor when you have the internet and tools in your garage? It's probably a better idea to go to the doctor.
Brain surgery, self-taught. Yeah, no,
Yeah. So I want to thank you guys very much for being on. Thank you for all your questions and for being with us. If you celebrate Christmas, then a Merry Christmas. If you celebrate in any other way, then I hope you very, very happy and joyful holidays. And if you do nothing, I hope you're relaxing and probably not anywhere near an airport.
exactly. Happy holidays, everyone.
Yeah, happy holidays, everybody. Thanks,
See you
Dan.
soon.
Thanks, Eric.
Meli Kalikimaka.